On March 11, 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and thus essentially the ruler of the world's largest country and a powerful communist empire. The relatively young Gorbachev, then 54, is a revelation compared to his predecessors. And it's not just his outward appearance that commands attention. After many years of hard and unchanging totalitarianism, it is Gorbachev who starts talking about the need for change and reform. And as will soon become clear, it is this man, once elected, who will indeed change almost beyond recognition not only the Soviet Union itself, but also, at least for a time, the whole world. With his reforms and policy style, Gorbachev set in motion a series of events that would eventually lead to the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the totalitarian regimes in Central and Eastern Europe, and the end of the so-called Cold War. During his reign, Mikhail Gorbachev would become the darling of the West and the hope of the East. However, it did not gain much recognition in the Soviet Union itself. For many people, his reforms will mean the loss of years of security rather than a path to freedom. Many Russians will also never forget the collapse of the Soviet Union, which his policies paved the way for. Mikhail Gorbachev was born on March 2, 1931 in the village of Privolnoye near Stavropol in southern Russia, into a Russian-Ukrainian family. Both his parents, his mother Maria and father Sergei, worked in agriculture and had little time to raise their son. Mikhail grew up mainly with his grandparents. After primary and secondary school, where he was one of the best pupils, he was given the opportunity to enter law school at Moscow's Lomonosov University without taking the entrance exam. The then 19-year-old Mikhail made great use of this opportunity. The move to Moscow brought a major turning point in his life, both for his future political career and in his private life. Gorbachev was already interested in politics in high school and was a member of several youth communist organizations. It was in Moscow that he confirmed his convictions, joining the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1952. In addition, he met Raisa Titarenko, a sociology student a year younger than him, whom he married after 2 years of dating. Their marriage will last 46 years, and it is Raisa who will become the person who will have an influence on Gorbachev like no other. After their studies, Mikhail and Raisa moved back to Stavropol, and 2 years later their daughter Irina was born. While Raisa has since divided her time between raising Irina and teaching at the local university, the ambitious and committed Gorbachev has focused on his career. He graduated from another university, this time in economics at the Agricultural Institute. Later, as a member of the Agricultural Committee, he tried to modernize local agriculture. He criticized centrally controlled management and tried to simplify the decision-making system in local collective farms. His ideas were a success, and it was also thanks to this that Gorbachev began rise in the career of a political party. From assistant director of the propaganda department of the local communist organization, he gradually worked his way up to the post of city party chief, then to the post of chief of the entire Stavropol region. It was also at this time that Gorbachev began to develop important political contacts. Among others, he became close to Alex Kosygin, the chairman of the Council of Ministers, the Soviet government, or with Yuri Andropov, then head of the KGB and later supreme leader of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev arrived at the Moscow headquarters of the Communist Party in the early 80s, and it was then that he gained his first experience of big politics. First on home ground as a member of parliament, but then also abroad. As a member of the Politburo, he led Soviet delegations on trips to what was then West Germany, Canada, or Great Britain. It has to be said that while Gorbachev was doing well at the time, the party was going through difficult times. In a quick succession, 3 communist leaders died. In November 1982, Leonid Brezhnev. In February 1984, his successor Yuri Andropov. And then on March 10, 1985, Konstantin Chernenko. There are basically permanent power struggles in the party. The top leadership therefore decides not to hesitate. The very next day after the death of Chernenko, on March 11, 1985, the election of a new Secretary General is organized. Gorbachev's most serious challenger is the candidate of the Brezhnev generation, 72 years old Viktor Grishin. Before the election, his supporters point not only to Gorbachev's inexperience, but also to the fact that it is not at all clear what to expect from a young politician in the highest office. The vote is close, but Gorbachev can celebrate in the end. He gets 5 votes, while Grishin gets 4 and 1 Politburo member abstains. Gorbachev's victory will be helped by the fact that he has the support of then Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko and the new head of the dreaded KGB Secret Service, Viktor Chevrikov. Mikhail Gorbachev, who is the first party chief born after the Great October Revolution, is not slacking off in office. In the first 10 months after his election, dozens of ministers and officials quit high-ranking positions. As the newly elected Central Secretary of the party, Gorbachev then introduced completely new concepts in the Soviet Union. Perestroika means rebuilding a weak economy and introducing the first market reforms. The feature in turn is a policy of open-mindedness about the country's communist past, and efforts to minimize the suppression of free speech. Thanks to these reforms, private enterprise emerged in the Soviet Union, albeit to a limited extent, and thousands of political prisoners and dissidents were set free. Moreover, Gorbachev will also launch hitherto unthinkable changes in diplomacy. The world was still divided by the so-called Cold War, with the communist countries led by the Soviet Union on one side and the United States and its allies on the other. The two camps have been threatening each other with nuclear weapons for a quarter of a century, but Gorbachev, to the surprise of many, decides to ease tensions, and has gradually established close relations with many Western politicians. The media in the West are absolutely delighted with his presentation, which is so much different from that of his predecessors. His popularity is also helped by the fact that his handsome and always well-groomed wife Raisa accompanies him to the summits, something unheard of by previous Soviet leaders. Gorbachev's meeting with U.S. President Ronald Reagan in Reykjavik, Iceland, in October 1986 will go down in history. At that meeting, the heads of the two hitherto hostile parties negotiate to limit the number of nuclear missiles in Europe. The two men sign the treaty a year later. They will take the first step towards ending the Cold War. Mikhail Gorbachev and U.S. President Bush will announce the final end of the Cold War in 1989 at their meeting in Malta.
I am convinced that a cooperative U.S.-Soviet relationship can indeed make the future safer and brighter.
Мир наш и наши отношения на переломном этапе. Мы должны действовать очень ответственно.
Mainly for the so-called Eastern Bloc, his other decisions will also be crucial. In 1988, for example, he will abolish the so-called Brezhnev Doctrine, which for the countries of the former Socialist Bloc meant limiting their sovereignty and subordinating themselves to the interests of the Soviet Union. Its end will contribute to the series of democratic revolutions that will then take place in Eastern Europe during 1989. Gorbachev was enjoying popularity at the time. Gorby, as he is nicknamed, is applauded by people in the East and West. But he is beginning to be perceived differently at home. The economic changes he initiated after his election were intended to reform the communist system and give new strength to the Soviet Empire. But the opposite happened. The waning economy cannot be started, and a number of political competitors also accuse Gorbachev of the fact that the traditional empire is losing its power. On February 7, 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev pushes for the Communist Party to give up its monopoly of power in the country. This will cause a shakeup not only in the Soviet leadership of the time, but also in the individual republics of the Union. The first of these, Lithuania, becomes independent on March 11th. Other Baltic republics will soon follow. On March 14th, Gorbachev is elected to the newly established post of President of the Soviet Union. However, many of his opponents could not come to terms with these events, and the tension eventually led to a coup attempt in August 1991. At the time, Gorbachev and his wife Raisa were isolated by conservative communist putschists during their vacation in the Crimea. They cited his ill health, saying that an 8-member state emergency committee was taking over power in the country. The aim should be to stop the reforms and keep the Soviet Union in its present form. But the coup ultimately fails, thanks to the intervention of a rising political star, Boris Yeltsin. Gorbachev will return to the Kremlin after 3 days, but it will be a swan song not only for him, but for the Soviet Union itself. It collapsed after 11 of the 15 former Soviet republics declared independence on December 21, 1991. Gorbachev himself announced his resignation 4 days later, symbolically burying a superpower occupying 1/6 of the world's landmass. This was 69 years after the Soviet Union was founded on December 30, 1922. The power and control of Soviet nuclear weapons, that is the imaginary red button controlling 30,000 nuclear charges, was taken over from Gorbachev by Boris Yeltsin, the president of successor Russia. The changes initiated by Mikhail Gorbachev helped to bring democracy back to the former communist bloc and to change the political map of the world. For this, the world awarded him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990. The first and at the same time last Soviet president experienced firsthand the combination of global fame and domestic unpopularity. In Russia, he is still one of the least popular politicians of the entire Soviet era.